For the very first time, we're thrilled to bring the twin gods of the sun and moon into the third dimension as plushies. Artemis and Apollo are available as adorable little stuffies for a limited time. Get a discount when you bundle both together at the link below. Also, we've got an entirely new merch store. It's got cool stuff. Check it out. Woo, thanks, bye. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new Detail Diatribe, where I am joined by Red.
What's up? I have peach juice with me today. It's not coffee.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You sure it's not caffeinated anyhow?
Well, it's not caffeinated, but it's about as sugary as what I expect a butterfly eats on an average day, so we'll see where I'm at by the bottom of the glass.
Perfect. And today we're going to be talking about Stray Gods, the role-playing musical. This was something that I'd had loosely on my radar for a little while, but assumed that I wouldn't be able to play it, and then lo and behold, it comes out on all consoles, and we were on a stream with our buddy Adam, Ludo History, and this game was just an absolute delight. Easily one of the biggest surprises of a game I'd ever had, because they're like, oh yeah, Greek mythology musical, that seems cool. I like the composer's work a lot, and we'll get into that later. And then we actually played it, like, Oh, this is really something here. This is crazy. I felt absolutely compelled to turn this into a detailed diatribe.
Of course.
So here we are.
It wasn't even on my radar, so I was like, what? I'm sorry, Greek mythology, urban fantasy, role-playing, musical, branching path, narrative, what? Then it was great, so.
So Stray Gods is difficult to quantify in one thing, but it is many things, essentially. It is a Greek mythology, urban fantasy, role-playing video game musical by composer Austin Wintory. It is an interactive muse them up, where your choices determine that's a genre. It's shoot 'em up, beat 'em up, muse them up.
A genre of one?
It is an absolutely stacked voice cast. Every time a new character walks in the door, it's like, holy shit, that person's here? Quite simply, one of the most clever and inventive adaptations of Greek mythology that I at least have ever seen. And we've seen a lot. I can't speak for you, Red, but for me this was like, oh shit, this is fascinatingly clever in what they're doing here, which is what compelled me so much to put this together.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think this might be the most creative Greek mythology adaptation I have also seen. Given that I mostly bury myself in the originals, I don't go seeking out all of the currently running urban fantasy. There might theoretically be something that's more creative, but who knows?
But we haven't seen it.
We haven't seen it.
Yeah. Essentially, the first thing that Adam did when he was like, hey, I'm going to be doing a stream of Stray Gods. I want you guys to come on. It was like, it's Austin Wintory's new game. I'm like, oh, of course.
Sold.
Being one of my favorite composers, one of gaming's best composers, him and his collaborators on this project, Tripod and Montaigne, absolutely killed it with this. If you're not familiar with his work, you may know him from Journey, Abzu, The Pathless, Banner Saga, Assassin's Creed, Aliens Fireteam Elite, whole bunch of other games. He is just absolutely on it. And he is a man of many different talents within video game music, not just one kind of sound, and you really get the sense of it with this score in this game, is that it goes all over the place. So a lot of very talented people work together to make this happen, and Austin himself will be among the first to say, wait, no, you need to give credit to these other people as well, which is something that I really admire about the way that he talks about his work. So not only is the instrumental component of all this fantastic, the cast is absolutely killer. You've got Laura Bailey, Troy Baker, who was the voice director of this game, Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, Janina Gavankar, Carrie Payton, Abubakar Salim, Felicia Day, Rahul Kohli, Allegra Clark, Merle Dandridge, Erica Ishii, Ashley Johnson, Lauren Spencer, Angela Bimani, Kimberly Brooks, Anthony Rapp. There are so many amazingly talented voices where even if you don't know their names, you'll be like, oh, I know that voice. It's absolutely killer, an incredible cast, and everybody absolutely brings it. No one phones this in. Everyone's giving it their absolute A game, and it's such a joy to listen to these characters bounce off each other, even when it's just purely dialogue.
Yeah, and also a lot of it is, of course, music, and like that's a f***ing hoist. Like voice actors who can also sing is one of those things where it's like it's hard to do. It's a big up on the resume and all that jazz. And this was. The very first song in the game is a solo done by Laura Bailey's character with no backing, and it's just like, oh yeah, let me just do solo vocals with no music to cover anything I do. Let me just start this off by flexing. let me just show you all
Yeah.
what I can do. And that was just very, very
Yeah.
cool. A very great way to start off and like set the tone of like, yeah, we're not f***ing around. We're not cutting corners on this.
Everyone does fantastic work, but Laura Bailey as Grace is absolutely like the rock that everything else is built upon in this cast.
So I need you to record voice lines for 3 very different personalities of this character, and then I need you to record 3 full-length musicals for those different versions of this character. You got it in you between Critical Role and everything else you do for a living?
Yeah, as we'll see, it's more than 3 full-length musicals.
Oh my
It is
God.
much more than 3. Yeah, 3 inputs, multiple outputs, but we're not quite there yet. So, again, Laura Bailey as Grace, the last muse. Essential quick premise of the story is that after the last muse, Calliope, is murdered, you gain her godly powers, and it is your job to find the killer, prove your innocence, and not be executed. So, good luck. You've got a week. Have fun. Figure it out, right? Easy stuff.
How hard could it be?
The way you do this is that you go around to places, meet these characters, but the core gameplay that distinguishes this from just any other visual novel is that this is a musical. And the way you interact with the music is that at various points, you as Grace can choose 3 different personality traits and paths through the song where you can be clever, which is the blue option, charming, which is the green option, and kick-ass, which is the red option. More interesting than just a, good guy, bad guy kind of thing. These 3 have a surprising amount of depth and variety to not only those 3 options, but also like what can be a clever option in one case versus a clever option in another instance. So even within those 3 personality traits, there's a lot of internal variety. And as you choose, one of those 3 options at any given point in the song, the music will branch. You won't just sing different things. You'll sing with a different melody, with different instruments, different tunes, different tones, different entire genres in some places.
Yeah.
So you can choose, one of 3 options in the first part of a song, and it just branches and branches and branches out, and you as the muse are the one who's directing all of this and making the music happen, which is really cool. It's a meeting of the character power of being a muse and the gameplay function of you essentially are the music director who's organizing all of this and making it happen.
Well, it is one of my favorite forms of ludonarrative assonance in that it's like, oh, it's going to be a musical, and of course the number one low-hanging fruit joke in any given musical is, why is everyone singing? How do they all know the words? And this just kicks the door down right out the gate with like, you're a muse. This is your whole deal. You used magic to do it. That's why everyone is suddenly rhyming and scanning perfectly. You're a muse.
It's explicitly in universe.
Yeah.
And there's a really fun instance in this first song right here, Pan's teaching song. I think it's called I Can Teach You, where he's saying, like, Grace, you have powers. And Grace is like, what do I do? And he says, start singing. And then you just do. And that's how it works. It's so cool.
Yeah.
So what we can see here in this chart is there are, the 3 different options, clever, charming, and kick-ass. And you choose one of the 3 options, and then it kind of comes back together. You choose them, and it comes back together. And you choose them, and it comes back together. And you get the basic sense of like, okay, I can express myself with these different choices. But then, as we see after verse 3, part 2, it kind of goes into a big splitsies scenario where you can choose one of the 3, and then you can keep choosing, and it keeps on branching. But also, you'll notice that based on the choices you made previously, that will inform what kind of options you have later on. So it's not just like you make a choice and then you make another choice and you make another choice and, essentially you get back to the same clean slate every time. As you progress down the song, it splits further and further and further and your choices ripple based on what you've done before. It's not just, you're adding together all the options for, okay, 3 choices here, 3 choices here, 3 choices here. Oh, there are 9 paths through this song. It is multiplicative. It is not additive. And that complexity gets really ridiculous in some of the later songs, where even this, 2 songs later, is absolutely bonkers. The variety of paths that you can take. As I write in the slides here, Austin, holy hell!
Is this the one with
How do you
Persephone?
even
I
keep
can
this straight?
see her in the background.
Yeah, this is Persephone's challenging a queen. So, for instance, if you do the kick-ass option to start the song, you will bust out into a rap, and the genre of the song completely changes. Versus if you do like the green or the blue option for the beginning of the song and then choose red later, you get a completely different option than if you just chose red right out the gate. it branches and splits out. And even here on this one song, there are 17 endings you can have here. For context, the bassist Alex Moukala, a good friend of Austin's and a very talented bassist in his own right, recorded 30 minutes of bass for just this 3-minute song.
Damn.
And all of that gets used in various parts of the song depending on what paths you take. So the pure mathematical complexity of what's happening in this game is hellish to ponder. Like how they kept this straight, let alone recorded all of it, is maddening. I'm using a lot of superlatives here because it is truly just so much to wrap your head around.
This is a nearly unimaginable amount of work, but I also think that, like, on the flip side, what you were talking about, like, with dialogue trees and stuff like that, and how your previous choices affect future choices, which is not a thing that a lot of, like, dialogue-based games have, and I think a lot of that is because a lot of dialogue-based games are huge. They're purposefully massive. It's not procedurally generated, but it's like, there's scripted lines with the characters, but it's hard enough to just have the individual, like, little isolated interactions. You don't want to add, like, and also they'll remember what you talked about if you've asked them this specific thing. I think, like, Mass Effect dialogue Paragon Renegade is about as complex as it can get in a game of that size, whereas this, it's compact. It is telling a story, and the way you get through it can go through a lot of different paths. Like, we followed along. I've only seen this game played once, and we got a very specific, like, route through it and a very specific ending, and it felt comprehensive and satisfying and stuff like that. But you've played through this thing like 3 or 4 times now, so
I've done my own playthrough, and I've seen a lot of other clips.
Right.
I wanted to do more playthroughs, but I was like,
can't wait that long.
Oh gosh, this game is like 7 hours. I'm going to be here for months, so I've seen a lot of what you can do, and just listening to the various soundtracks that are available. So there are essentially, Austin put out 4 different soundtracks where there is the all red choices, all blue choices, all green choices, and then there's the Pantheon Edition, which is like one theoretical path of weaving your way through the game, making different choices at different points. I've listened to all of those, and I've seen a whole bunch of different clips of like what can happen in different in different instances. And even as many hours as I've spent engrossed in this since even just our first playthrough, I'm very acutely aware of just how much there is that I have not seen. Like romance options I haven't gotten to.
Right.
There's a lot, and this game, you know, on its own is like, you know, 6 to 8 hours, but the replayability that this game has is something else.
I think that's really interesting because this game, it feels like there's not a single thread out of place, if that makes sense. It's like nothing is left dangling. This game is the exact opposite of an open world setting, if that makes sense. It's not full freedom of movement. It's not you can just f*** off and leave the plot behind. It's like the whole game is the plot. It is a visual novel that you are playing through with your choices, and you can't just f*** around and break the rules and all that jazz. But because of that, because it's in a very finite enclosed space, it's like we can go absolutely ham on how much detail we put into this and how much work we put into this. So you can have it be like, hey, if they've made this specific choice 4 hours earlier, that's a different line in the song. F*** you.
Oh, yeah.
We can just polish this to a mirror shine.
An entirely different set of characters you interact with later in the game, depending on one choice you make 4 hours ago. Yeah, I mean, there's some games that are, you know, a mile wide and an inch deep. No, have you not heard that? A mile wide and an inch deep?
No, it's very evocative. I'm sure I've heard it before. I just love it.
This game is like a yard across and about 7 miles deep.
The Lake Baikal of games.
Yeah, with 4 romance options, 3 core personality traits, choices large and small across the game. There are several or dozens of repeat playthroughs you can do and still be seeing new stuff every time. And then, of course, if you want to get more granular, the music has functionally millions of outcomes, even sometimes within a single song. Within the final main musical number, I think Austin said there are like tens of millions of potential outcomes based on choices you've made earlier in the game and then in that moment in the song itself. It takes a really interesting approach to replayability because, like, the benefit of a game like this is that when you replay it, even if, you know, like the conversations that you're having with the NPCs start to feel similar, the music still has the capacity to be completely different every time you go through it, which is what's so interesting for this as a music game, that you are still being wowed and surprised. Even if you know, like, oh, I'm gonna do a playthrough where I romance this character. I feel like I can understand, like, oh, I'll have these different conversations, and I've had these conversations before, and I'll choose different dialogue options, and yeah, I'll see different stuff. But then when you get to the musical numbers, it's completely different. It's wild.
Man.
It's nuts.
Yeah, this is a nearly unthinkable amount of work.
It's not 3 inputs, 3 outputs. It's 3 inputs and thousands upon thousands of different outcomes.
Well, it's 3 inputs at dozens of different nodes, multiplying out to thousands and thousands of outcomes.
Yes.
There are a lot of games that narrow things down to very simple, like, yes or no, choose the good ending or the bad ending or the true ending if you really want to make it fancy. But this is one of those things where it's like, absolutely every single choice you make has some impact on, like, the lyrics, the instrumentation, the themes, how many verses you get at later points in the game, stuff like that. When you multiply that out, it is not surprising that you start getting into the tens of millions department, because, like, how many instruments in an orchestra, how many tracks can you activate or deactivate when you're stacking things together, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's very cool. It starts making sense when you start, like, crunching the numbers, but it's still unbelievably complicated.
Just as a math problem, this is baffling. There are 3 different options that you can choose, and each of them has a different musical mood associated with it. So for charming, you have the harp that plays every time you make a charming choice. You'll hear this little harp go off, and that's a very warm and calm little signal on its own. But the music that you get when you choose charming option will tend to be more kind of like smooth, calming, comfortable, whereas if you choose the kick-ass option, you get this little electric bass riff under every single choice, but then the music that you get when you choose kick-ass is strong and aggressive and assertive and powerful. If you choose clever, you get this bass clarinet under every single one of your choices, but then the music that comes after a clever choice is smooth and jazzy and kind of like noirish in places. And those 3 core musical feelings reverberate out into a bunch of different permutations across the game.
God, Peter and the Wolf fucking wishes it had what this game has.
Yeah. So it really sells the power of being a muse where your choices ripple out and take shape in the music itself. You feel the feedback, you hear the feedback of your choices in the world, in the music, and the mood that you create by your choices reflects them well. So it's a positive feedback loop of what you put into the game with your choices and what you get out with the music itself.
There it is.
It's good-ass game design. It's good game design. So like we said, I've listened to the albums, done multiple playthroughs, seen clips of alternate paths, and there's so much that I haven't seen here. I feel like I could spend another 4 weeks doing research and still have new things to bring to this detailed diatribe. So I had to tell myself, all right, look, I gotta cut myself off and just go for it. But even what I do know from having done our very first playthrough with Ludo History is this game is quite simply the most inventive adaptation of Greek myth we've ever seen. And for me, it's not even close. Why is that? It's because of 3 simple things. It's because of characters, it's because of world building, and it's because of story structure. We're going to take those one by one.
Yes,
So
good.
first off, every character that you will interact with in this game is a surprise in the absolute best way possible. No one here is what you're going to expect them to be. No one quite matches their portrayal in the myths, and that's a feature because the characterizations you get instead are more nuanced, more interesting, more dynamic, more intriguing and compelling than what it would be if it's just like, hey, you've seen the myths on OSP? Yeah, it's those characters exactly.
Color-coded for your convenience.
Yeah, it would be too predictable if it was the exact characters we're familiar with from reading Edith Hamilton's Mythology or reading Percy Jackson. It's different, it's new, and it's a surprise, and that's really cool because it allows the game to do a lot more clever stuff. Relationships that you might expect are redefined, backstories are completely rewritten, motivations are recontextualized. It's very, very different. It's a real shock. And as we were playing this, we're like, oh, this is okay. I'm surprised. I'm intrigued. Go on, but I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
Yet within the world and within the context of the other characters, it's perfectly harmonious. As you play through it, you'll see that every choice they make fits.
One of the things that I think makes this work the best is that it feels like every one of these characters has been alive for the last X thousand years. and has been growing and changing. So it's like not inconceivable that they once lined up with some of the stories about them. In fact, I think there's a conversation we can have with Apollo where he mentions like, yeah, no, I used to be a jerk. You wouldn't have liked me back then. And it's like, bro, correct.
Yeah.
But like,
yeah.
But it kind of gets the impression like these guys have been around for a really long time, you know, going through different lifetimes and stuff like that, developing and changing. You never expect that these guys should be the same as they were, you know, some number of thousand years ago. And that's a thing that a lot of stories don't really fully commit to. So like, you brought up the Percy Jackson comparison, and in that one, the gods definitely feel sort of timeless and immortal, because it's like, yeah, they're still around. They're still basically the same as they were. They have a slightly different aesthetic, but it always feels like this thin veneer over their true ancient self. And that's fine. That's a perfectly legitimate way to do it. It's just in this one, it makes and like American gods, taking the Norse pantheon, does a lot of like, yeah, the gods came to America and it was really bad for them. It was like putting a freshwater fish in a saltwater environment, and they either like withered up into little dickhead husks or they just died. And it's like, well, that makes me sad. But it doesn't really feel like you kind of have the two extremes of like, these are either immortal, timeless beings, or like, these guys are distressingly fragile and they'll just die if circumstances aren't correct for them. And this game hits the middle of, these guys have been around that long. Things have happened to them. They've changed from the version we would recognize in the story. We get the impression that they want to keep going. You know, they're doing their best. They're keeping on trucking, but like, stuff has happened. Like the very first scene, it's like, okay, Athena is the only person here who's dressed like I expect her to be, and she's oh, well, look at that. She's kind of got the attitude I expect, but it's like, damn, Persephone looks cool, and she fucking hates us for some reason. And like, whoa, Apollo is so sad. What's up with that? And you know, god damn it. But it's so fun. But like, what I really like about this is that all of these choices, they're creative enough for us to be like, oh, that's new, but they make sense enough for us to be like, and I love it. Like it takes me a second to adjust, but then it's like, all right, I'm up to speed, let's go.
And for those, you know, a couple examples out the gate, Athena, goddess of wisdom, and in this permutation, she is a bit of a Karen. She wants to speak to the manager, and even in Grace's like character journal, it's like, I feel like she wants to speak to the manager a lot and always gets what she wants. It says that in her journal.
Yeah.
And like you said, she still dresses like it's 431 BC and Athens is at the top of its game. In this permutation of the world, she is the de facto leader of the chorus, which is kind of like the council of the gods. And that's in the absence of Zeus, Hera, any of the elder Olympians. They're just not here. And her characterization is really interesting because when you put Athena in that position, she kind of turns into like eldest sister complex turned soccer mom. She's very nice, but there's an edge to it. Like, she's doing a lot of work to hold everything together. And what I find most interesting is that she, more than any other deity, is the most like patently, transparently uncomfortable living in the modern world. She's like, oh yeah, you know, we're still around. We have Wi-Fi. And she says it like, ha! And later on, she's like, oh, these mortals are so clever. Television. And she pronounces it wrong in a way that's actually very unnerving because she emphasizes the vision.
Right.
It's because it's like that is a little bit more of how like an ancient Greek person might say it if they were to put those two syllables together. So I really love her character, that she is just like, of all the gods, she feels ancient compared to the other ones here. And you're actually hearing that right now, because this backing track is one that plays in Athena's office, and her music is unique in that it's the only time you'll hear the bouzouki, which is a traditional Greek, also kind of like implied to be, you know, ancient Greek instrument. And while the rest of the music skews very contemporary in what you'll hear elsewhere in this video, and also just like the songs themselves, Athena's music is the only one with this specific choice of an instrument that conveys this sense of like old traditional Greekness. So in her design, her characterization, and her music itself, everything points to this idea. And a lot of other characters have these kinds of like cohesive visual and sonic identities. So it's really, really neatly done. And then you get Apollo, who's just the saddest boy. He owns one shirt, he never buttons it, even for special occasions. That does come up, that is a joke that he makes in the game. And in this version, he has a roommate named Oracle, who insists that they are not actually Apollo's Oracle. Oracle is just their handle.
Yeah.
And Apollo's like, yeah, I collect oracles. They just kind of show up. So when
I
Oracle
love
here
that.
showed up, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I knew to expect you. And Oracle's like, oh, Paul, you're being ridiculous.
I love that lore so much because it's so dumb, but also so perfect. With Apollo being like, yeah, there's some innate connection between me and a chosen oracle. Because of course, this ties back to the Oracle at Delphi. You know, that's like the whole point. And so it's just kind of like, yeah, I always have an oracle, but I'm a big old sad sack and I'm not really like worshipped anymore. So sometimes they just turn up and then we live together. And meanwhile, this little techie gremlin is just kind of like, whatever, bro, keep stock in the fridge and we're cool. And Apollo's like, yep.
It's like, I keep asking Paul to get me an Ethernet cord, and he's like, I do not know what that is.
Oh,
it's very fun, and you know, more than just being a joke, he actually is like a very like traumatized little boy. He refuses to look at prophecies anymore, even though that's like his power is prophecy, because he's essentially crippled by the determinism that you get once you see it. So all of Greek mythology is people getting prophecies and then screwing up trying to avoid them. So he's like, look, I don't play that game anymore. Whenever you give someone a prophecy, they lose their mind. They go absolutely nuts trying to stop it, and then they just make it come true anyway. I don't do that anymore. So this man is essentially like not using any of his god powers to do anything. He just sits in a sad little surfer shack by the beach in the city and never buttons his shirt. He's so sad. He hasn't sung in centuries. This poor boy.
But one thing,
Troy, buddy, I want to give you a hug.
But one thing I really like about this version of Apollo, it was just a very subtle little moment, because when we first meet those gods, the chorus, Grace has just had the muse Calliope die in her arms and pass her power on to her, and she's freaking out. She doesn't know what's going on, and the other chorus members are like, well, they start singing, and we have not yet learned about Grace's muse powers, so we're not sure if this is diegetic or not. We don't really know what's going on. We're not really in control of the situation, and Apollo cuts the music off when it comes to his verse. He just says, I disagree. Yeah. He doesn't sing along, and the thing is, that was the moment where I was like, yeah, he would have the power to say no thank you to a musical number. He's a god of music and the leader of the muses. That makes perfect sense, and that is truly an unequaled experience, is when you're like, hey, that makes so much sense in hindsight, but I wouldn't have thought of that out the gate without it having happened in front of me. So anyway, Apollo is such a sad boy in this. It's really funny, but then it's not funny.
A lot of the characterizations are just so clever and so out there. Just for one more example, this is maybe the most straightforward one, but it's too much to not show off. They have the Minotaur Asterius, the keeper of the reliquary, an absolute soft boy. He says he doesn't sing, he's more of a dancer. Voiced by Rahul Kohli. Just fantastic work in this character. I love him so much in this. His whole thing is that he has a crush on Hecate, but he just cannot admit it. He's so shy. He's such a soft boy.
I think the thing with the Minotaur is it's like probably the one part of this game where I was like, I have seen this interpretation before. I have seen the what if the Minotaur was nice and misunderstood, and it's sad that he got locked in a labyrinth from like birth onward. And it's like, yeah, that's completely reasonable. But the part where I was like, oh, okay, I like this, is when I think Grace was like, did you really like eat people? He was like, what? No! Except for Theseus, but that guy was a prick. And I was like, all right, I'm fine. I don't mind this, actually. It's like, oh, the Minotaur's such a soft boy, but he did kill Theseus, so that's fine. That's fine.
And even when they do these kinds of inversions where they kind of like cast this as like a Beauty and the Beast type thing, they still have the mythological understanding beneath everything to make that kind of a cut, like, oh, like Theseus is a dick. Like, of all the Greek heroes, he's the most just categorically awful of the bunch. So I love that choice. But also, he's not just like a useless little Minotaur guy. Like, he is clever. He outsmarts even Athena's rules about what you can and can't say about what happens in the reliquary to to give Grace useful information. So he's not just like a helpless little like twiddling his thumbs together Minotaur. Like, he is still a clever character, and that's not a trait you would give the Minotaur. So even this, like, even the most like simple reversal of the bunch is still a very interesting and intricate recasting of what seems to be like the simplest character possible. He's a bull. He's just a bull.
Yeah, making him nice is easy. Making him smart is new.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a lot of other character choices that are completely non-obvious, but all brilliant in their own ways. Just to run down the list, you've got Persephone, who's a badass crime boss with a nightclub. Hecate is an omniscient titaness out of time who just loves tea. It's very sweet. Her and Freddie are best friends.
Yeah.
Aphrodite is a very somber goddess who is utterly crippled with grief. And a lot of these gods hold very old grudges that date back to, you know, before Ovid wrote this stuff down. And they are all just so damn tired, is the sense that you get from a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's really well done, and it's well sold by all of the different line deliveries that you get. So how do they manage to do these kinds of character inversions? They seem like completely different people. And there is a very good in-lore reason for that.
I actually do want to say the thing with Aphrodite is interesting because when we first meet her with the chorus, she's probably the one where she and Athena are the ones where they look the most like you expect them to. It's Aphrodite. She's a beautiful woman in a slinky dress, and she actually seems a little more positive about us than the others. She seems a little more reluctant for the whole like, oh, we're gonna just kill you because f*** you. She's not as down with that, and it's like, okay, cool. And I think there's a couple points where it's like, oh, Aphrodite's doing this party, and it's like, yeah, that makes sense for Aphrodite. And then there's this like turning point that's like the sudden drop into ice water where it's like, oh no, I've misread the situation. Because Aphrodite's the one that looks the most put together on the surface without having enough focus put on her early on for you to realize that something's different. But when it shifts, it becomes, it's another like, oh, that makes so much sense in hindsight. I wouldn't have guessed that, but now I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with a couple character bios thrown out for you to ponder upon, this is your chance to go play it. If you would like to experience it for yourself, which I think is the preferable way to go in, this is about a good amount of information for you to just go in and enjoy it, because if this seems like it might be your thing, it is. This is definitely not for everyone, but if you think you might like this and you're on this channel, so we think you might, just go for it. I really think you'll enjoy it. You won't regret it. Please experience it for yourself, sing your own story, then come back and we'll dish. Sound good, everybody?
Ooh, do we get to do spoilers after this point?
Yes, because wow, that was amazing. Thank you all for going to play the game first and then coming back. We appreciate you.
And trust you.
We trust you. Don't lie to us. So, the mythology here is so goddamn clever, it actually kind of makes me angry. Because there are so many extremely smart, simple, just like a handful of ideas that help to make the story and the characters much more grounded and human than almost every other like modern day urban fantasy Greek myth story basically ever. And we've seen lore for lore's sake. That's fun to chew on. You know, you get your little Dark Souls lore entries and stuff like that. But all of the world building in this game is specifically to serve characterization, and it works fantastically for that exact purpose. It is fundamentally its own interpretation of Greek mythology, and goddamn, it's good.
Yeah.
The single most fundamental aspect to all of this is the concept of eidolons, which is that the immortal spirit of these divinities are these little golden orbs that exist within a person's soul and get passed on when the god dies. So the versions of these characters that you see are not the original bodies of these people from back in ancient Greece. You know, it's like, okay, you know, it makes sense, but also it's a clever way to solve a lot of kind of tricky lore problems.
Yeah.
Because when an idol, you know, dies and passes on, they go into a new person with their own personality. And then over the course of millennia, you can understand how just by having been through different people, the gods' personalities will shift and evolve over time into the versions that they are now. So that just on the lore, face of it itself, kind of solves the question of how do we get from these original versions of the gods that we know in the ancient times to some of the characterizations that we have today. But also, of course, it allows the whole like spirit of the muse to go into us and set the entire game into motion.
Well, it's like we meet Hermes, and then it becomes clear that they've only been Hermes for about a year.
Yeah.
They kind of know what's up, and they've got all the powers and the attitude down, but like, they don't really know 100% what's going on. The Apollo that we met has been Apollo for long enough that his memories of his mortal life are very distant. And one thing that that this correlates with is that the Eidolon does retain the memories of the god, but it takes a little while for it to kick in. So Grace, when she gets the power boost, she doesn't know what's happening. She doesn't have any weird memories yet. But basically she gets told, like, yeah, after a while, the 3,000 plus years of memories contained within that Eidolon are going to essentially take you over. Like, you're not going to stop being Grace, but you're going to be like 2% Grace, 98% the totality of every other Calliope and their memories. Because it's kind of like, they've been alive for a really long time. Like, you've been alive for like 20 years tops, something like that. So who knows?
Yeah. And they kind of address this early in the game where it's like, well, if I'm technically Calliope, but I'm Grace, will I call myself Calliope later? And Apollo's like, you might.
Yeah.
And this is a concept called the Veil, which is essentially a delayed divine deja vu, where at first, to make it a little less traumatic, you don't get all of the memories at once, but over time, over a couple years, you'll start to have dreams of places that you've been to before, but you haven't been there before. But you have been there before, and you'll start to see flashes and start to remember things and put together all of these previous lives that you as the god have lived, even though, you, Grace, have not actually had any of those experiences for yourself. So one day, Grace may call herself Calliope. But critically, the oldest memories fade with each passing on. So it's like a reflection of a reflection of a reflection going down the chain. So you can, think back, a couple thousand years, but it starts to get a little bit hazy. And when I talked to a couple characters about this, Apollo and Persephone in various playthroughs, they're each like, yeah, I mean, I couldn't really tell you what the first me was like. It was a long time ago, and the one that I think is the original me, I'm not even sure is the original me. So even the gods themselves don't completely know where they come from, which helps solve a couple finicky lore problems. It's very powerful to let a character say, I don't know. That creates, not only does it avoid giving a weird or maybe contradictory answer, it is intriguing and engrossing, and it's immersive in itself to kind of have this sense where even some of the characters aren't completely in the loop of what's going on.
There's a few things that I think is very cool about that, because one of the things that Apollo brings up is, with the early memories, he's not sure what is a thing that happened and what's a story he was told about a previous life of his that may or may not have been true. Because that starts getting fuzzy, because it's like, well, what about the mythical Apollo? He did a lot of confusing stuff, and he's like, I wish I could tell you which of those things I actually did, because boy, that guy was a dick. And it's so interesting. But there's also, the whole Eidolon system allows for some fuzziness in a few other places. Like, for instance, are some of the gods dead, or are they just MIA? Because, like, if a god's body dies and the Eidolon goes to somewhere else, like, the gods might just think, oh no, we lost him, he's dead, and then like 100 plus years later, they can just turn up if they wanted to. And that just gives the writers a ton of freedom of movement, because when the chorus first meets, it's like, these are not the big names I was expecting. Like, there's only 5 of them, not 12. There's no sign of Zeus or Poseidon. We later hear about Hades. We've got Persephone here. She's not normally even on the list of Olympians.
Nope.
And it's like, okay, Apollo, but no Artemis. What's up with that? Like, there's no sign of Ares. There's no sign of Hephaestus. There's no sign of Demeter. Like, all this stuff. And it's like, what's going on? And we don't really get answers to a lot of those. We do get answers to some of them, but that's part of what makes it fun. It's like, not everything has a solid answer. And the ones that do have a solid answer, some of them are hidden in specific playthroughs. Like, you can find out what's up with, like, what happened to Artemis, but only if you play the game correctly in the right specific way to get that little snippet of information. And the other gods don't know either. And the other thing that I think is cool about the Eidolon system is it kind of makes it clear that, like, the Minotaur and Hecate are not part of that, clearly. They're just both like some kind of weird immortal magical creature, because Hecate does not look like a human being at all.
No.
She's a Titaness. She's clearly immortal. She lives in a different realm, and her perception of time is so fun. She's got that Dr. Manhattan thing going where she's like, no, I will not know that you've broken in for another 14 minutes when the alarm is raised. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. So she knows everything, but she's only allowed to act on it as it's parceled out to her in the system of linear time. And she's so chill with this. So whenever she's like, we will talk about this, there will be tea. It's like, she's not saying, we should do that, it'll be fun. She's like, I'm also there doing it right now.
Yeah, the way that she talks in the future tense is like, oh god, it kind of wigs me out, but it's so fun as a choice.
Man, so much good stuff in this game.
And some of the questions of like, what are the gods doing, leads you to the inevitable, where was Ares in the 1940s? It's like, what were the minions doing in the 40s? You know, like those kinds of questions where you kind of have to answer that if you're in a modern, you know, urban fantasy setting. Secret world urban fantasies have to kind of play this dance where if you start to put yourself in a real history, you have to answer a couple questions. And one of the big ones is usually, what were you up to during the war? And what we learned from Aphrodite's party is that Ares missed out on the First World War and would be damned if he missed out the second one, so he caused it. Thanks, Ares. Countless idols were killed. We learned that Demeter was killed in the war. Oof. Aphrodite was captured and tortured, and Hephaestus ended the war by striking a deal with the United States government to build the fucking bomb.
Oh my god. Well, as we were like seeing this play out the first time we were watching it play through, there was this like building dread of like, oh no, that makes too much sense. Yep. This is the fucking danger zone of urban fantasy. This is the nightmare because it's like, hey, why did these like magical secret wizards not do anything about the countless atrocities? And I like how this game like looks us dead in the face and is like, one of them caused the atrocities. It's like, oh, what were the other idols doing? Trying very hard not to die. That's what. It's like, oh, they're not omnipotent. They're not omniscient. I don't remember who was talking about it. I think it might have been Aphrodite who was like, we saw things were getting bad, but we didn't do anything. And by the time we did anything, it was way too late. And it's like, that's cool. That is an answer to the question. And I like it. And the fact that they didn't skitter away from it or be like, oh, well, let's not touch the atrocities of history. They were like, Ares influenced things. Doesn't mean that the humans that participated were not responsible. It just means that Ares also did very bad shit. And then at the end, it's like, and then Hephaestus did a big heroic save move. And we were like, what kind of heroic save move? Oh, no.
And they even, like, Apollo says, like, oh yeah, Ares found a bunch of jackbooted assholes who were hyped up on their supremacy and was like, oh, you guys, let's be friends. So it's clear that Ares didn't just push a button to start a war. He found the people who would be the most down for it. Mm-hmm. It was a symbiotic relationship between Ares and the Nazis. Yeah. Abundantly clearly them.
Super definitely, very blatantly.
Yeah. God.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can kind of even do a little bit of extra world building out because, like, Nazis like Mussolini and friends too had a very like classical aesthetic to them.
Oh yeah, they idolized
what they were trying to channel. So like that, even getting into some of the weeds of it, which is definitely like not necessarily intended by the meta text of the game, but like you can kind of see like, oh, that fits a little too comfortably. Like I can kind of see how that clicks together.
Yeah, if I was one of those like turbo fans of Wagner who was like, oh yes, Mars, the bringer of war, and then Mars, the bringer of war, showed up on my doorstep and said we should go kill people, I'd probably be a little too down for that were I in that space. But like this is I think one of the like moments in the game where it's like, well, now that I know that this is like the most recent open wound on Eidolon society, I understand a lot more of their characterization now. It's like, why is everyone such a sad sack? Oh, that's a pretty good reason. Boy.
Which then leads us to another question, which is, what about the fall of Rome? Which is something we missed in our first playthrough, and I found out about on my next playthrough.
What?
Because Persephone tells us that one day after Rome falls, Zeus gathers the gods together and says, hey, we need to prepare for war. And Persephone doesn't actually remember the war happening, because next thing that she was aware, she was a nun in 16th century Trieste being woken up by Athena, and she was in a different body. So she lived 1,000 years, passed on her Eidolon at least once, probably more, and had entire lives that she clearly lived, but is functionally completely unaware of. And this is something that all of the gods experience. They call it the gap, and it is essentially the 1,000 years between the fall of Rome and, they don't say it outright, but the timing is clear enough, the Renaissance.
Oh my god.
So Athena then spends a century waking up the other idols and then kind of like putting everything together, by which point Zeus had disappeared. Who the hell knows what happened to him? But the implied, like, dark age of, like, yeah, what did the gods do after the world kind of moved on from them? They fell the fuck asleep.
That's wow. That's buck wild.
Yeah, and it was only after the broad rediscovery of classical society and the revitalized interest in them in the Renaissance in Italy and Greece and later on that they started to kind of wake up one by one. The implication is that Athena was the first to wake up. This is fucking terrifying. It is pure genius from a writing perspective, but it is eldritch enough when the gods don't really know where they came from, can't remember which version of them was the original, get a little confused of like what's a mortal story and what actually happened. But to sleepwalk through 1,000 years, living entire lifetimes, is next level theological nightmare fuel. And to Mr. David Gaider, who is the main narrative director of this game, bravo, holy shit.
This is bananas. Obviously, this is the first time hearing of it. As mentioned, we missed it in the first playthrough. And honestly, very solid work not like bringing this up a few slides before where I was like, yeah, and who knows where some of the idols went? Anything could have happened. I was like, he's being really quiet for some reason. I hope I'm not like dragging on. No, you're lying in wait. But man, that's so fun. And I'm glad that it doesn't seem like we get an answer to that other than just like we could infer one, but they don't tell us what could have happened. At least
I didn't get one in my playthrough.
Right. Because that's what I like. That's what I like about world building. World building that's willing to be like, this is the edges of what we know, and we don't know what's beyond that. Like those old maps where it's like, here, there maybe be dragons? Yeah, no, probably. Could be dragons.
And like, again, from world building for just lore perspective versus informing the characters, like I made the connection of, oh, they probably woke back up in the 16th century because of the Renaissance. But like when Persephone's telling us that she doesn't care, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that she was asleep and then she woke up. It informs the character more than it exists to be just like, oh, here's an interesting wiki article for you to peruse. And I really like that they clearly put the focus on the characterization rather than look at this backstory that we wrote, because it's damn effective writing. And to be able to have the confidence to let a character say, yeah, man, even I don't know, and I was there. That's effective. That's really good writing.
God, the power, and also this helps explain why everyone is such a sad sack, because it's like, oh yeah, we got absolutely no closure for 1,000 years.
Yep.
So it's like, oh yeah, this guy Zeus is very important to me, and now he's fucking gone, and we don't even know why or how or when. So maybe I'll just be sad and mad for the next, 400 years.
God, it's nuts. So for all the innovation that is going on in this game with characters and the story beats and some of the themes and the lore we've seen, this game deeply respects the classics in very clever and intentional ways. It's like, to break the rules, you need to know the rules. And this game very clearly knows the rules and what they are playing with when they are getting into this mythological space. And there's a deep level of respect that you can see. The more you dig, the more you find. It is really cool for me, but also it serves to give the game like a sense of place and genuine ancientness in a couple very important areas. A lot of this is subtle that you won't really notice, but it's like, with bass, it's sometimes felt rather than heard, which not always true, but that's the saying. Yeah. The feelings that you get from a lot of these choices that we'll see in a second are very evocative and very strong. So first out the gate, Red, you mentioned the opening number, Killer by Laura Bailey. This is Adrift, and the music is like a boat lost at sea with no sails, not a breeze. I'm drifting, cold waters, no stars to be seen. And this like very extended metaphor of being lost, clearly an homage to the feeling of being stuck on the water experienced by Odysseus and Aeneas. And that is a very classical way to start a story. Characters on a boat, they're lost, and they hate it. It sucks out here, guys.
Yeah, no, that if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
The melody itself reappears later in a reprise, as well as just interspersed throughout the story as a reference to this idea of being adrift. There are other songs that pull on that melody to convey the idea, where it's different words, but the feeling underneath it is the same thing as like a boat lost at sea. So while adrift is being woven through the score, so too is this very epic classical literary idea that goes all the way back to the earliest stories in Greek literature and the Aeneid, boom roasted, latecomer Roman. Sorry, Virgil. Additionally, on the purely like plot point basis, we have a classic underworld visit, which is again Aeneid and Odyssey stuff. It's also a stock trope in a lot of Greek myths that you got to go to the underworld to get some information or to pull an Orpheus plot and try to find your loved ones.
It's pretty rare, but Orpheus is the exception and not the rule, but it is very, very classical. And the visit to the underworld for information from the dead is super classic. They do that in the Odyssey for like a whole chapter.
Yeah. Grace meets Calliope again in this sequence and gets a lot of information from that, and also gets to play out her own little Orpheus plot with Freddie, which is a really, really interesting moment with, again, a couple choices that you can make in that scenario. I've seen it go in either direction. Gut-wrenching either way.
Great. I've only seen it go the other direction.
Obviously, it fits within the context of the story they're telling, but having this underworld trip and all of the weight that carries, not just for Persephone or for Grace, but for, us as the viewers, having seen these kinds of underworld stories in other mythological media, it's deeply literary, very strong connection there, and a great choice to do that, to have this one moment where, all this stuff is happening in this city, and we take little jaunts to Hecate's domain, but this is like we are going to somewhere else.
Yeah.
Somewhere beneath. And that's really cool.
And it's interesting that the underworld, because we learn early on, like Persephone is barred from the underworld because she killed Hades for entirely reasonable reasons in this version.
Yes.
And they were like, you don't get to usurp his throne. That's naughty. You don't get to go there anymore. But like the underworld is still there, just completely neglected. And it's just kind of spooky because it's like, oh yeah, this realm can just fall to ruin with nobody in charge, and it doesn't go away, doesn't turn into anything hideous, doesn't bleed over with other underworlds as far as we can tell. It's just there, rotting, and I think it's very cool.
It's a really well done underworld, and depending on what choices you make, you can also have interesting outcomes at the end of the game too, which is super fun. Also, one of my favorite songs from the whole score is The Throne, where if you choose the red option, you get some absolute bangers, especially with Orpheus's choices in that number. Super fun.
As soon as he busted out a ghost electric guitar, I was like, okay.
Bow, wow. It's so good. I've been singing that in science, like, Lou, what are you? I'm like, it's Orpheus' song.
You don't
of course,
understand,
though,
it's poetry.
since we are playing with epic literature, we're also dealing with a little bit of the construction of epic poetry, and then putting that in the music is a very potent choice.
Oh my god, I just connected the dots on something. I'm so sorry. So many epic poems start with the poet basically supplicating the muses. And that's how this game begins!
They know what they're doing! They know what they're doing!
All right, I'm good. I'm normal again.
Literally, sing muse of the rage of Peleus son Achilles at the start of the Aeneid, or at the start of the Iliad. And then the first thing that happens is Calliope's like, I can just sing a little number here.
Drop a few bars. Why not?
They know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing.
So, of course, we get a lot of epic motifs in the music. Austin Wintory score plays with several types of themes. Adrift echoes across the music. Every red, green, or blue choice and character has their own signature instruments. So Apollo has like a vibraphone. When Calliope is mentioned, there is a double recorder, alto and bass. So like every character has their own little mini musical identity to them. But there are also riffs on the epithets of epic poetry. So like, swift-footed Achilles, Dawn with fingertips of rose, Athena who bears the aegis, Phoebus Apollo, and like all these different epithets of ways that you address characters. Those kinds of like literary poetic formulas of speech make appearances in the score here. So the most obvious ways are a couple little musical mini melodies that are sprinkled across different songs. So in the beginning of Challenging a Queen, which is the song where you first meet Persephone and try to kick her ass, she says, "You're lost, little girl." And that melody, that construction, the notes, that cadence repeats in a bunch of different songs throughout the score, conveying that same idea of a lost little girl. Additionally, there is between Aphrodite's song and the song at the very end of the game, The Trial, there is a we were wrong, and that musically is mirrored between the two because that construction, those words share the same idea, and that's reflected musically. There's another one with Hecate that's a riff that appears more in the instrumentation, but there are also a lot of different ones you can get from your choices in the music at various points. So for Phantom Pains, which is the opening song with Apollo, you can get one of the branches is Apollo singing cause and effect, and you can get that mirrored out in other parts of the music across the game, conveying that same idea and that same feeling. So you get this very epic, poetic construction where you have repeated phrases, repeated ideas in the same literary meter context echoed out across the whole score. That is a very literary, deep poetic cut, and it makes the music feel very cohesive across itself, across the different songs, even when you're making all these different choices, as well as just cohesive to this ancient epic idea that this spirit of Calliope that invoked epic poetry in Homer is doing a lot of the same stuff now, and that's cool as hell.
Yeah, it is.
So, of course, you also have the story structure that is conveyed through hundreds of cascading interactive choices, and that has, I think, 3 major narrative purposes. One is that, simply put, you can mess up. There are a lot of places where you are going to accomplish something, or you have a couple options of how you can handle something, and that may go well for a character or poorly, because the gods mess up. They are sometimes selfish, they are sometimes vindictive or vain or rash, and that makes people get hurt and sometimes even die. Apollo calls that out himself. He was like, I was a jerk. I got a lot of people killed back in my day. And that is very true to the spirit of the mythos, that gods make powerful choices that have effects on other people, mortals and divine alike. That's a really cool one right out the gate.
Yeah.
But also, there is no definitive canonical version, because the version of the game that you get when you play is the canon. All of the outcomes were possible within, the matrix of what characters could do, but you, as the muse, elicit, you evoke, you inspire, and teased out one of those outcomes into existence. So it's like a superposition, a kind of Schrodinger's whatever, where all of these different outcomes were equally possible until one of them happened. They all could have been there. And Austin Wintory and other members of the team say, there is no canon version of the game. Whatever you get is the canon, and I respect the commitment to being like, every ending you get will feel like, in a way, like it could have only gone this way. And when we played it, I'm like, I cannot fathom another way this could have ended. And of course, playing it a second time, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I see clearly the choices that led to different things. And then watching a bunch of clips and videos of other pathways through songs and other ending states is like, oh yeah, there's a lot of variety to what can happen. So the kind of spiraling out into different possible futures is a very connected idea with this sense of being the muse, and you are just pulling out possibilities. You can't make someone do anything they wouldn't normally do, but you chose to make someone act a little more angry than they otherwise would have, or act a little more kind than they otherwise would have, or make someone speak up when they maybe would have not said something. You don't put words in their mouth, you just inspire them. So you're drawing out one possible ending, which is just as canon as all of the other ones.
Yeah.
And I really like that approach metatextually with what the team has conveyed of look, when you play this game, you get the real ending. And I like that. I respect that.
One thing I think is very interesting is that I've seen little clips from other playthroughs and stuff like that, and it is hard to mentally integrate them into my sense of the canon, because the version of Grace that you get through your playthrough is so distinct that I can see it an extra kick-ass route, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. She's a smart girl who is charming, not trying to fucking pick fistfights with gods. And it's yeah, because you have to make the choice. Grace is a very different person depending on how you play the game. The thing is, the fact that you can mess up is one thing, but also the game is pretty careful to be hey, however you get to the ending, we're gonna try and make it feel generally satisfying. It might be bittersweet, but we'll sort of still tie it together. So the ending we got when we watched Adam play was I would say probably not the perfectly ideal ending, were such a thing to even exist. There were a couple points where it's oh, I wish we'd done this. But it was still oh yeah, it kind of had to be this way, actually. Like, it, really, when you think about it, and it's like, well, you could have played it differently, but really this way, it did kind of have to be this way for this version of Grace, for this version of the story.
Exactly. And this also ties into the narrative itself, where a bunch of different characters will explain that you can fulfill a prophecy in multiple ways. And that is very cohesive with ideas of, prophecies or tricksy. We've seen that in the ancient literature itself that we have in the real world. Like, you don't have to follow a prophecy to the letter, and if you try to avoid a prophecy by, assuming it literally, you're going to get into trouble. But you have leeway around it. Hecate says the big things are pretty well established in my book, but the little things are subject to more free will. When Apollo was talking about prophecy, he says that once you are given a prophecy, you're locked in. You now know, and you are essentially going to try and run away from it and then make it true. But if you don't know a prophecy, you still have some freedom to move. So both of these characters kind of understand the metatext of interactive narrative, which I find really cool, because if you're playing through the game and you kind of know how it ends, that will slightly inform your choices on subsequent playthroughs, and that itself kind of functions like a prophecy that you are either trying to follow or trying to push back against by being like, oh, I'll choose something really different this time.
Yeah.
And in a way, it still kind of comes back to an ending, but it will end up being a very different ending than the other ones you would have gotten. So there is a lot of interesting conversation between what the developers are saying of no canon version, what the characters say about, canonicity and prophecy and free will and fate, and what the players will do with that information. It's like a three-way conversation that has a million different outcomes. And I think that's a very, very interesting kind of narrative space that you can inhabit in this game on subsequent playthroughs that a lot of other games don't really allow for, even when it's a kind of like choose your own adventure game. They don't quite get to this level of depth and nuance in the multiple different pathways you can take.
Yeah.
So for three quick comparisons' sake, let's look at three other adaptations of Greek myth and try to figure out how Stray Gods relates to them. So first off the gate is Hades, which is essentially playing it straight. These are the myths right off the page. Percy Jackson is a much more clearly, modern urban fantasy, but it still hews pretty closely to the original myths, just retold in a modern context. So Percy does a lot of Odysseus plots, he does a lot of Theseus plots, he does a lot of Perseus plots. He's going through a lot of these ancient motions, but in a new context. But it's still pretty close to those original myths in terms of like what the characters are really doing and what kind of story they're telling. It's a very classic hero's journey.
Right.
Third off here, which is maybe the odd one out, you have John Wick, which is not on paper a mythological adaptation, except it really is, and it's kind of one of the best adaptations of Homer that I think you're really gonna find anywhere, because it is 100% vibes. It's all epic feelings. The whole point of John Wick 1 is that his dog gets killed and he goes on a revenge quest. My guys, that's the back half of the Iliad.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
And then it only goes on from there. So in other movies, you see John Wick acting out something approximating an Odyssey plot, where he's going on this huge journey to remember and connect with the memory of his wife. There's a lot of other things, large and small, that kind of tie into this, where John Wick is at once demonstrating characteristics of Achilles, characteristics of Odysseus, characteristics of Diomedes. The second movie is really a Diomedes plot where he kills the gods and gets in way over his head, like that one scene in book 4 or 5. I want to say it's 5. It is oblique and subtle, but it has a lot of what I think are clear nods to epic stories. So there are a lot of different ways you can do Greek myth, and Stray Gods is in its own entire league compared to these guys, where it has its own comfortable space, where every single one of these here is a perfectly valid way to tell Greek myths, but there is a variety to it. And even beyond these three, I think Stray Gods is a really fascinating example of what you can do if you're really willing to mess with it and get creative with the formula and the world building and the lore and the characters. I almost did a detailed diatribe on John Wick and decided, I can probably fold this into something later. And lo and behold, here I am doing it now, so look at me go.
Yeah.
But
What an ending.
On paper, none of this should work.
Yeah.
Absolutely none of this should work. The music shouldn't be able to be this dynamic and still sound good. The characters shouldn't be so reactive to your choices. The mythology shouldn't be so cohesive while being such a departure from the original myths.
Yeah.
Yet it is. None of this has been done before, and especially not to this level of quality or creativity. The fact that any of this even functions is a technical and artistic miracle, lest I go back to that flowchart for the Challenging a Queen song. Like, holy hell, are you kidding me? But for it to also be great, I mean, forget good, this is fantastic. That's a phenomenal achievement. And right out the gate, for the first piece of media that I'm aware of to even try something like this, to have set the bar so high, I really feel like, having played this, I witnessed like a step-up moment of what interactive storytelling can do. Like, this is the most next-gen experience that I've really ever had with a game. And it's not even because of, like, hardware or processing power or graphics cards. It's next-gen creativity.
Yeah.
And what it can do with a game.
Like, again, we were talking about just the unthinkable amount of work that went into this. Like, the visuals, I don't think there's even a single 3D model in this game except for some background shots.
The environments are 3D,
right. But like
all the characters are sprites.
The characters use 2D sprites. They don't have, like, animated lip flaps. It's like, it breaks all the rules of current game development, where it's like everything has to be so achingly realistic to show how fancy our console is. And this is like, hey, if you're just really good at what you do, the game does not need to look like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's astounding. I am just so utterly floored by the fact that this game came together at all and then is so good. I really, really do think that we're going to see other games take notes from this. I mean, Godspeed to anyone trying to top this. Eventually it will happen, which is really cool to think about. Yeah. But it's like, Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild really turned down the volume on other people making open world games. It's like, get on our level, guys. This, I feel, is like that kind of an innovation, maybe even more so, for a kind of choose your own adventure, interactive narrative, because there's nothing else like this.
No.
And it's a musical.
And
There is nothing else like this, and it's a musical. Good God.
Like, that's an exponential additional level of complexity to this, and it works so goddamn well.
And then the songs are also bangers. Like, God. Stray Gods.
Yeah. Stray Gods!
That is essentially all that I have. I could keep going, but it would be unstructured beyond this point. So for real, if you decided to just kind of go through this whole thing and haven't played it now, please do go play it. We still kind of held back on some things because I knew there were some people who'd be like, oh, I want to hear what they have to say about it.
I am that person, so.
Yeah. If you have not played it and you've listened this far, do go play it. There are still surprises in store for you yet.
Do it. It'll be so fun.
Oh God, I'm so impressed.
Yeah.
This is something else.
It's going to be very hard to imitate, but man, I hope a lot of up-and-coming game developers learn from this. In terms of what games can be, this is a huge step in a new direction, and I think it's very cool.
Thanks to everybody at Summerfall Games who worked to bring this to life, the entire cast, Austin Wintory, Tripod Montaigne, everybody in the musical array of artists who made this possible. Damn fine work.
Yeah, excellent work, everybody. Honestly, I think the game at this point just has to kind of speak for itself.
It does.
So,
bye!
Perfect.